has been 246 days since Ferris State went back-to-back by defeating Colorado School of Mines in the 2022 Division II Championship. No team has won 3 in a row since North Alabama did that in 1993, 94, and 95. Do the Bulldogs have what it takes to complete the task this year? Welcome, everybody, to the kickoff of the 2023 season with Chuck Bittner, Chris Ferguson, Tony Nicolette, Justin Polizzi, Matt Wawicki. I'm Brandon Meisner. Thank you very much for joining us today. So, which teams do the pollsters believe will have the ability and, excuse me, do you think will be in the what poll do pollsters think will be 3 in a row for Ferris State? And also, when it comes to the Ore Diggers, what are their chances to climb to the top of the mountain this year? Where is your team going to end up? Stay with us and find out. Let's get this thing started right now. So coming in at number 25, it's the CSU Pueblo or Thunderwolves. They were 8-4 last year and finished second in the RMAC.
Well, Brandon, I like Ferris State's chances to repeat better than you get in the opening right there.
Yeah,
but anyway, guys, looking at CSU Pueblo, there's a real good chance this group makes a splash. Phil Veal, brand new head coach, takes the place of John Riston, longtime head coach, who will still be around. He's with the athletic department yet. And I really think that the amount of talent that the new head coach was able to acquire through the portal, guys who have been very productive with other squads in D2, guys like Chance Fuller he brings in from Fort Hays, who's been an all-league player twice in the MIAA. You've got guys like Adrian Soto, who also comes over from Hays, who is an MIAA all-conference player as well. He brings him too, along with Howard Russell from Eastern New Mexico, running back who had over 500 yards last season. And then a guy who I think may burst on the scene a little bit, was being recruited pretty heavily by different squads in the Midwest and ends up landing at Pueblo. Reggie Ratzlaff, who was a top JUCO receiver in the country a year ago. And, he brings to them 1,300 yards and 18 scores from where he came from. And I look at that offense, the offensive pieces that he brings in, along with the fact he's got Andrew Cook, a wideout who caught 12 touchdowns a year ago. And, you pair that with a few Elite 100 defensive players that they have. They lose some guys on the front, the front seven. But I really think that there's a chance that this squad's going to be able to go ahead and challenge and really make a case to go right up against Mines and play them a little closer than they did in their contests a year ago.
All right, very good. Let's move on to number 24. It's Davenport. They were 8-3 last year, and they finished third in the GLIAC.
Yeah, Brandon. So Sparky McEwen's got things right on schedule for Davenport. I mean, that was only their 6th, I believe, team in school history after a few years in NAIA and then moving into D2 in the GLIAC. So to be able to get a top-end finish within the GLIAC and a playoff berth after an 8-0 start is a great result for the Panthers. They do return their quarterback in Jason Whitaker to lead the offense. They did actually move the ball pretty effectively throughout most of the year last year, and they get Cleef Jenkins back at tailback as well. They did pick up Myron Harris, a transfer from Wayne State, who was a second-team All-GLIAC performer for the Warriors last year. And they also picked up a 1,000-yard receiver in the transfer portal, Peyton Brown from Lake Erie, which, a 1,000-yard guy from Lake Erie must be a guy who can actually do some things. So that's a good pickup for them. I think where Davenport's going to have some questions to answer is on the defensive side of the ball. They gave up between 29 and 30 points a game last year. They actually allowed 24 points or more 7 times in their 11 contests. So if there's a side of the ball where there maybe is a question mark as they come into the season, that's probably it. They did snag Julius Wilkerson in the transfer portal, also from Wayne State, who is a second-team All-GLIAC performer last year. And, in a league where you had Connor Neer and Abe Swanson and guys like that, taking all the linebacker plaudits, that shows you how good Wilkerson is. And their schedule sets up well for them to actually replicate what they did last year. They don't really play the toughest part of their schedule other than Bowie State in week 2. They don't really face that meat of the schedule till they get Saginaw, Ferris, and Grand Valley in succession to finish things out.
Very good. Moving on to number 23, Lenore Rhine. The Bears were 8-3 last year. They were tied for first in the SAC Piedmont division.
Yeah, the Bears were young last year on offense. They returned some of those top players this year, led by Dwayne McGee, rushed for 900 yards and 11 scores last year. Junior quarterback Sean White threw for over 200 yards in 7 of their last 9 games, 18 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. Top receiving target Keelan Parsons is also back. He's been over 500 yards the last 2 seasons, along with 10 scores. Offensively, they're looking pretty good, and don't count the defense yet either, guys. On defense, they're John Ross May, linebacker, who's been on our All-American watch list, is back with 75 tackles and 8 tackles for loss last year. Defensive lineman Andre Jefferson, he's 6'2", 275 at the D tackle position, and he's only a junior. Total 13 sacks a year ago. He's a top defensive lineman here in the Division II level. And I think the schedule also is going to shape up good for the Bears this year. They don't start out with Ferris State like they did a year ago. Instead, they start with St. Augustine and Fayetteville State before they get into conference play. The conference, they're going to play 3 of their toughest conference games on the road at Limestone, at Newberry, and at Wingate. But I think Coach Jacobs, he has won in the postseason at Notre Dame College, is one of the winningest coaches in Division II actively right now. So this squad is probably one of the top teams in the South Atlantic Conference for 2023, guys.
Very good. Right. Number 22, Virginia Union. They were 9-2 last year. They finished second in the CIAA North.
And you can't talk about Virginia Union without talking about that man on the screen, Jada Byers, who was a Harlan Hill finalist last year. Surrounding him, there's some question marks, certainly on offense. The quarterback from last year, Jakari Grant, graduated. And then also John Giles, their leading receiver, actually transferred to West Florida. So two questions to try to get some pressure off of Jada Byers with the passing game. Also, they did lose a couple of offensive linemen to graduation as well. Certainly some pieces that need to be replaced. What I will note, though, is that defense and special teams have a lot coming back, especially defensive line with Isaac Anderson, Armani Burden, the kicker, Brady Myers, and the punter, Marvin Holmes, very solid to keep some of those offenses at bay and having to travel some pretty long yards. If there's one thing that Virginia Union will certainly need to focus on going into this year, probably turnovers, probably a little bit too much turnovers for a top 25 team. But the schedule is certainly favorable for them coming out the gate with Morehouse and then Shaw in a non-conference game. So that's Virginia Union.
Very good. All right. And number 21 is Indianapolis. The Greyhounds were 9-2 last year. They finished first in the GLVC.
Yeah, UIndy was a unanimous pick by the coaches in the GLVC to repeat as the conference champion. And it's pretty easy to see why. They've got about 8 starters back on offense. I love their offensive line. There's a lot of depth and experience there. They have a returning quarterback, Connor Kinnett, and they actually added some depth at the quarterback position as well with the transfer from Hillsdale. So they've got a lot of experience and a lot of depth back on the offensive side of the football. Now, they did lose one of the best players in program history, Toriano Clinton, who's actually getting a shot at the NFL right now. But they were able to backfill that position with an outstanding transfer, a running back by the name of John Lewis from Birmingham Southern. He was actually a first-team Division III All-American a year ago, led Division III in rushing yards per game. So pretty great to backfill a player like Toriano Clinton with an All-American coming from Division III. And on the defensive side of the football, they also have a lot of experience back, about 7 starters, including 2 players on the defensive side of the ball that are on our Elite 100 watch list. So it's just a really good-looking team coming back for UIndy. Obvious choice to potentially repeat as a GLVC champion. They do have some tough games. I'm already looking at that Week 3 game against Saginaw Valley State. That was really kind of a measuring stick game for them outside of the conference last year that did not go well. So excited to see if they can improve their fortunes stepping outside of league play this year.
Very good. Number 20 is Benedict. They were 11-1 last year, and they won the SIAC championship.
Yeah, and they're certainly voted to repeat this year, but they're certainly going to have to do so without Eric Phoenix, their quarterback last year, who led that offense, transferred to Murray State. It's possible that somebody like Aeneas Dennis, who was at Shorter, who did some pretty good offense at Shorter, may come in there to step in as a transfer. But whoever lines up at quarterback certainly is going to have a wealth at running back with DeAndre Duhart and Noah Zaire Scotland. What's particularly interesting is one of the strengths going to be the defensive line. Lou Danellis is going to be on there, but he's got two other guys who should also be on that line to go to start the season. So, Benedict went transfer shopping quite a bit to try to shore up their offensive line. That's one that they also lost quite a few players in order to try to get them back to that championship game and hopefully back to playoffs. So that's Benedict.
Ferg, let me ask you, do you think that, Benedict, it felt like they kind of came out of nowhere and all of a sudden really, undefeated regular season, put themselves in a great spot for the postseason. It didn't really play out, in just that way for them, but they really put themselves on the map last year. Do you think that they're going to be able to repeat again? Or what are your candid thoughts after taking a look over on them?
Well, I think that they've certainly got the horsepower to do it. I think the only issue is you've got a rapidly improving top half of the SIAC. Fort Valley State is going to be a really tough out this year, even with losing Emmanuel Wilson to the NFL. And then also you can't really count out Albany State and you can't count out Tuskegee. Those teams are trying to reload, and Albany in particular has quite a bit coming back on offense. So there's some tough outs there, but I tell you one thing, the top half of the schedule looks extremely manageable for them. So you really won't get a read on Benedict until probably middle half of the season.
Very good. Number 19, West Georgia. The Wolves were 8-2 last year, third in the Gulf South.
Yeah, the Wolves were ranked number 1 last year nationally with over 500 yards offensively per game. However, quarterback Harrison Frost has graduated, and they also have a lot to replace on that side of the ball. They don't really know yet who's going to take snaps under center for the Wolves as of yet. Look for the defense to be pretty strong for West Georgia this year. Is going to have to keep them in some games until they can get their footing offensively. I think there's a lot of they're going to play with a chip on their shoulder this year. I think they feel like they were left out of the playoffs a year ago. I think they have a lot to prove. Then you couple that with some holes on the offense for the Wolves. I think West Georgia is they're going to be tough to handle in the Gulf South Conference. I think there's some question marks in that conference this year. So I expect West Georgia to make a little bit of a run here down the stretch, particularly late in the season, guys.
All right, Justin, we're going to come right back to you because Wingate is ranked number 18. They were 11-3 last year and finished tied for first in the Piedmont division of the South Atlantic Conference.
Yeah, last year you could say the Piedmont was the tougher of the two sides in that division, particularly late in the season. Wingate had one of the top defenses nationally in 2022. And probably one of the best college defenses I've seen in a long time. I got to see them play a couple times in person, but and it propelled them to 2 playoff wins. They had to go on the road and win in tough environments, and their defense, I think, carried them. We talk about it all the time. Defense travels, and it did for them last year. Unfortunately, when they went down to West Florida last year, just a little bit too much firepower, and they just couldn't keep up offensively. However, Wingate does return to a couple guys from that defense last year, with Trey Morrison kind of being the leader of that group. Quarterback-wise, some question marks going into the season right now for Wingate. The offense was a little stagnant, particularly late in the season last year. They're consistent in what they do. And they've lost a fair amount of guys on the offensive side of the ball. So it's going to be interesting to see what they can do offensively. And if they were able to kind of get in the transfer portal a little bit and bolster some of that on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, I just want to note that when I was doing some of my analysis for the CLAA, quite a few folks actually transferred out of the program, and I kind of wonder a little bit about depth for them.
Yeah, that's a great question, Ferg, and I think I know exactly what you're talking about. I think that's a question, but I think it's going to be a question for a lot of people, guys. I think a lot of people have been hit by the transfer portal and helped by the transfer portal. So we know they lost some guys. It's the question to me is who were they able to bring in? Were they able to replace some of that depth and build that depth chart back up?
All right. Coming in at number 17, the Emporia State Hornets. They were 9-3 last year and finished third in the MIAA.
Yeah, and here you can't talk about Emporia without talking about the crafty lefty and Braden Gleason, also a fantasy football titan out there. So just want to drop that in the notes. But, he is surrounded by quite a bit of a cast, particularly at running back. They did lose their leading wide receiver, but the number 2 and number 3 options are coming back. Folks, this is a high-powered offense, particularly through the air. It's very, very potent. Quite a bit coming back as well on defense, although they do lose 2 of their top linebackers. But, all the other parts of that defense, especially on the defensive line and defensive back, quite a bit coming back for them. So, one thing with Emporia is simply that they were in a lot of close games last year. They had Pitt State lost by 1 point. And sometimes they end up having to play from behind. And so the question is, can they prosper? Can they live with prosperity here and get to that next level and get into the playoffs? But they're certainly going to have some challenges, particularly in the first half of the year.
All right, very good. Number 16, Slippery Rock, a record of 10-3 last year. They finished first in the PSAC West.
Yeah, this is a program that's gotten really comfortable being in our top 25 poll over the last decade. They've won or tied for the PSAC West Division in 8 of the last 11 years. And they have a lot of experience coming back in their 2023 roster. They've got about 19 players that started at least 5 games a year ago. Their entire offensive line is back, which is a huge asset for this Rock offense. They've got Chris Dior at running back, a very experienced ball carrier. Kyle Sheets is probably one of the top returning wide receivers in the country. Now, they will have a new starting quarterback. Noah Grover graduated after last year's season. The Rock will have a new starting quarterback under center. Now, historically, they've had a lot of success integrating transfers at the quarterback position. A little bit of a different approach this year. They're actually going to go with Braden Long. He's a 6'3" junior. He's been in the program since coming out of high school. So he was the backup last year, got a little bit of experience in about 5 or 6 games, and looks like he's going to be QB1 heading into the season. So if he plays well, I think they're going to have a chance to be a top 10 team by late in the season. And he's going to have a great supporting cast around him to help adapt that starting role. So a little bit less coming back on defense, but if they can backfill a few holes in the defensive line, I really like what the Slippery Rock team can be early in the season.
Right. And a team that always plays good defense is coming in at number 15. Harding was 9-2 last year, finished second in the GAC.
Yeah, Brandon, this is a squad that just, their culture is such where you don't see much turnover and things like the portal. They really have things kind of a family atmosphere there. And they return a whole lot on offense. They return, Cole Keelan at quarterback, an athletic playmaking quarterback who runs the ball, a dozen times a game. Will Fitzhugh, bell cow back. Got hurt about mid-season last year, and he was averaging, 12, 13 carries a game, just to kind of show you the way they kind of spread it on out. And Jalen Spicer, he's kind of their home run guy, and the way that he's able to get to the corner and real explosive runner. You pair that with a handful of other guys who got carries last year, a lot of them, and they just bring back a ton on offense. I think they're kind of a scary offense that way because we've seen them be very good in the past. Defensively last year, they were solid. They weren't as good as they had been, where they were like a top team defensively. And they lose Cade Pugh and Patrick Healy, two of their top defenders from a year ago. But basically, if you take a look at their defense, they still go ahead and bring back a good portion of that group. And I really think that this is a stock up type team. And I'd be real surprised if they don't find their way in the playoffs.
Coming in at number 14, Ashland. They are 10-2, or they were 10-2, and they were the champions of the GMAC.
Yeah, and Whit just talked about a stock up team, and this is a team, Brandon, that I'm not going to say they're stocked down, but boy, they got a lot of question marks coming into 2023. Starting at the top of the program, Lee Owens retiring after 19 seasons at the helm, so first-year head coach Doug Geiser is going to take over things. Now he does have the luxury of leading rusher Larry Martin coming back. And Giovanni Washington was a 1,200-yard back from 2019 who's just been struggling with injuries the last couple of years. He's going to have that 1-2 punch in the backfield, so they should be able to run the ball okay. But in addition to changes at the helm of the program in total, you lose Austin Brenner, who was a 4-year starter at quarterback and was a huge source of stability for the program in total. And then you lose Michael Ayers, who was an elite 100 linebacker for us last year. And so your two key players, one on each side of the ball, being gone is really going to be tough to overcome. And they actually felt a little bit sluggish going into the playoffs last year, finishing 10-1 on the season, but then they got a great first-round win over Notre Dame, and they kind of proved a lot of us wrong. I think most of us picked maybe against them in our picks last year. But boy, when you look at what they face in the first 5 weeks of the season this year, we're going to know a lot about whether or not these guys are stock up or stock down real quick. So they open at IUP, they host Ferris, and then they've got GMAT games against Hillsdale, Tiffin, and Ohio Dominican. And so 4 of those 5 teams had winning records last year. The only one that didn't, Hillsdale, is a trophy game, and that's the team that handed them their only regular season loss last year. So we're going to know a lot in the first half of the season of what Ashland's going to be able to make happen. But sometimes change brings out the best in a program. So we're going to see real quick whether that happens here.
And there will be a lot of change at Shepherd, who comes in at number 13. They were 13-2 last year and were a semifinalist in the playoffs.
Yeah, I guess you couldn't blame the Rams if they feel like they should be a little bit higher based on their recent track record of success. I mean, they are the 2-time defending regional champions. But boy, they just lost so many impact players that really helped carry them to those regional titles over the last couple of years. They had, I think, 6 first-team All-Americans, Elite 100 kind of players. They got 4 of them that are trying to battle it out for NFL rosters right now. I mean, Tyson Bajan's actually pushing to be the backup to Justin Fields for the Chicago Bears, and things are looking really good for him. So just so much experience. And one of the things that we tend to overlook with losing players like that is the leadership. It's just a lot of leadership that leaves the locker room. But I have a lot of faith in the Rams program. They're not new to being good. They've been an elite caliber program for a long time. So I think they will be good. I think 13 is about where they should be. They do have some players coming back. There's a little bit of experience, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. And really kind of the big variable, the big question will be, who steps in at quarterback. They did bring in a transfer. His name is Seth Morgan. He has some starting experience at Virginia Military Institute, actually passed for just shy of 5,000 yards in his career at VMI. So he is an experienced player. I think he's going to integrate very well into that Shepherd offense, but still just a lot of newness, some unknowns in that Rams locker room. So we'll see what they can be, but I think 13 is about right where they belong as we start the season.
And fellow PSAC opponent, IUP, is ranked at number 12. They were 10-2 last year. They were the champions of the PSAC.
Yeah, and I'm really curious to see what they come out with this year to start the season, Brandon. They won the PSAC championship game over Shepherd, which was a phenomenal performance for them. But around that, the end of the season wasn't especially strong for them. They had a puzzling loss to Gannon. They got by the playoff game against Ashland, but just didn't play very well that day. That definitely could have lost that game. and then were really blown out by Shepherd in the third round of the playoffs. So I think there's a lot to prove for this IUP team. They did lose some key players. They actually did very well in the transfer portal, brought in some offensive linemen that have starting experience to backfill a couple of spots, added to their wide receiver depth, which I really like Hilton Ridley as somebody who emerges as their go-to guy, kind of replacing the role that Dwayne Brown was in. I think he's an exceptional player. And they really kind of won the D2 transfer sweepstakes. They got Karst Hunter, the highly coveted transfer quarterback from Colorado Mesa. He was really kind of the best Division II to Division II transfer quarterback that was kind of on the market last year. We were watching him with great interest to see where he was going to wind up, and he landed at IUP, which I think is a very good fit for him. I think he's really going to like the offense that they run there. I think he's going to fit in with their culture very well. So if they can work out a few spots that they're missing on defense, I think they're going to be a good team. They have a lot of size. Our friend Matt Berglund, who writes for the Indiana Gazette, wrote an article last week about the size that they have at the offensive and defensive lines. So, that doesn't necessarily equate to having a great unit, but there's a framework there for IUP to be very good again this year.
Chuck, with IUP adding Karst Hunter, who obviously you just spoke about there, he seems like he'll be a plug-and-play type of guy there for IUP. He's a physical player, too. Do you think that with Karst there, and then maybe with some of the changes that are going on with some of the other top PSAC teams, is that, you think, some of what has IUP kind of at the top of the list for us?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, IUP historically has done very well bringing in transfer quarterbacks. That's just kind of their model. They've had a lot of success doing that. And I think Karst Hunter is really going to hit the ground running with them. I mean, he's got a good head on his shoulders. We've seen what he can do on the field, but he's also got a really good head on his shoulders. And he wanted to go to a program that has a potential to win. He wanted to go to a program that has a history of success, has a proven track record, and a place where athletics are really embraced, and a place where athletics really kind of bring up the whole profile of a campus. So I think he's a great fit there, and yeah, absolutely. But I think he's a big part of why IUP is looked at as the favorite in the PSAC.
At number 11, Ouachita Baptist. They were 11-1 last year, and they finished first in the GAC.
Yeah, Brandon, and they had a fantastic season, 11-0, undefeated, outright champs in the GAC, and I think they were a couple games clear of just about everybody. But boy, it's hard to forget the loss that they took at the hands of Northwest Missouri State on their home field in Arkadelphia in that first round of the playoffs. I mean, that was tough to watch. So. They definitely have, I think, a lot of work cut out for them in terms of being able to make a deep run in the playoffs this year. And obviously, we talked about Harding at 15. That's definitely somebody that they've got circled on their calendar in week 7. They did lose TJ Cole, their all-time leading rusher, which obviously it's hard to replace that kind of production. But Kendall Givens was a really strong number 2. So we'll see how well he handles stepping in to take over the load at the tailback position. Riley Harms to Connor Flanagan, that duo's back, so there should be plenty of stability in the passing offense for Ouachita. But like we talked about, I think the physicality and maybe some question marks on defense are really going to be tough to overcome. Now, with that said, I think they got 10 starters coming back on defense, so maybe that experience will help them kind of shore up some of the holes that they showed last year towards the end of the season. Like I said, they did have a couple of tough outs against East Central, and they kind of really got away with one in the Battle of the Ravine against Henderson State in that overtime game. So there's a lot coming back for Ouachita, but boy, I think they still feel like that bad taste in the mouth of how the season ended is really going to have to be their fire as they get the season started.
All right, very good. All right, before we reveal the top 10, I'd like to take a moment to welcome Boss's Pizza and Chicken as a sponsor of Inside D2 Football. They are a company based in Sioux Falls, and they have made a commitment to support our efforts to cover and promote Division II athletics. So Boss has multiple locations, including restaurants directly in D2 markets. They're in Sioux Falls, Rapid City, the Fargo-Moorhead area, as well as Des Moines.
You know what, Brandon, what you did mention there is that the owner-operator of Boss's Pizza, Jeremy Seafeld, he and I are old buddies, and heck, even coached a little bit of little league baseball together. But here's the thing: is that not only do they have good, really good pizza and chicken, and now you're making me hungry by showing all this on the graphic. But and I know that's surprising that you guys would that I'm getting hungry in the middle of the show. But with Bosses, they also support University of Sioux Falls and Augustana, both here in town. They're open late for kids on college campuses, open to like 4 a.m. So I mean, Brandon, I know you're a late night eater, so that would be right up your alley. And and if you take a look, they kind of specialize in at their different locations in trying to go ahead and stream local games and things like that. And leave this slide up for a minute, Brandon, because I want to come back to this. But with them, they're basically trying to get some more locations, and a lot of them, frankly, in the Midwestern part of where we get a lot of coverage in the MIAA, Northern Sun. And guys, we're basically looking to have a kind of an effort to go ahead and have them pair with us. And this graphic here that's on the display, these are two professional eaters that have a 28-inch pizza in front of them called the Boss Hog, and they have a Boss Hog challenge at Boss's Pizza and Chicken. And our fearless leader, along with myself, are going to take this on at the end of September when USF and Augustana play their rivalry game. And maybe we'll even have some video for this for the show, just a little bit of a, talk about a little bit. But only 5% of those who try this challenge are able to eat the whole thing. So we're hoping that between Brandon and I, we can, make this happen. But we're really glad to have Bosses along with us as our sponsor. They're somehow a fitting sponsor. I haven't really arrived at how, but they are for sure. Just look at us.
Hey, one other thing to mention, they are looking to expand to new markets, as Whit said. In their footprint, I'm thinking MIAA, but I don't know for sure. But if you are an entrepreneur and have interest in opening a restaurant in your town, visit their website. It's just bosspizzaandchicken.com. If you look in the upper right, there's a franchise e-link. And whether you go there and eat or whether you decide to become a franchisee, we'd appreciate if you'd mention that you heard about them from us. We're trying to help them out as because they're helping us out, and we want them to know that we care about them and that we're working hard. And we obviously wouldn't promote a product that we didn't believe in. So you can obviously trust us on that one. So,
Brandon, maybe in a future week I'll do like a live eat during the show. I've seen some other, small college shows. They're big on that, and so we maybe it's something we'll get into.
That looks like your appetizer pizza, Whit. I have faith in you guys. I think you can do it.
Well, I'm glad you guys are behind me.
So in any case, this is what their website looks like, and go to the upper right and you can fill out the franchisee information if you are so inclined to do so. All right, enough food. Let's get back to the countdown, everybody. Coming in at number 10, Bemidji State. The Beavers were 10-3 last year, finished first in the Northern Sun.
Oh, now I got to talk about a football team. I was looking at pizza again there. I'm sorry. Guys, Bemidji, essentially, they're going to bring back 9 guys on offense for starters, 9 guys on defense that are starters. They lose Brandon Bolio, a superstar wideout they had. But they're going to go ahead and have plenty of bodies that are ready to go ahead and kind of, to take up any of the slack. They bring Ali Muhammad, great running back from Minot State. 1,000-yard rusher at Minot State. Not easy to be a 1,000-yard rusher at Minot State in the last few years. And he's going to go ahead and take over for Jalen Fry, who departs and is heading out to South Dakota Mines. And, Brandon Auld has been pretty dynamic for them. Still probably throws more picks than I would like. But, at the same time, he also throws for a whole heck of a lot of yards. And they have a defense that made really nice improvements year to year to where where they're bringing back basically they're losing 2 D linemen and the rest of the tacklers are coming back. So If I'm Bemidji State, I'm feeling pretty good about what they got heading into the season.
Is this going to be their best team they've ever had?
I think there's a real chance for that, Brandon. It seems like things are kind of all building in that direction. So many of the guys from this core group, I mean, they're a very physical Northern football team, and they're really starting to kind of move in that direction. The challenge I think they have in the Northern Sun is that top group of teams has gotten pretty tough all the way about 1 through 8. And it's hard to escape there without being, without getting a few losses. And they would be real tough if they were having a bunch of home games come playoffs, because I don't know how many people are lining up to go to Bemidji. That's further north than Duluth. So
usually they have skates on when they're, when they're going to Bemidji. All right. Let's move on then, folks. Number 9, Delta State. The Statesmen were 11-2 last year. They were first place in the GSC.
Yeah, Delta State last year surprised, I think, a lot of people, claiming the division title. They returned Patrick Shegog, which is huge for them. He's a great dual threat quarterback for the Statesmen. They did lose a couple guys on the offense, however. They lost one of their top offensive linemen and 2 wideouts. And so they typically are not known as a defensive team, but they do return 2 of their top 4 tacklers. And that includes Marlon Wyndham, who comes back. He's got 82 stops, 8 tackles for loss. And again, not typically known for their defense. They were able to come up with some big stops and turnovers when they needed it last year. But they're typically, when you think of Delta State guys, you're thinking of that high-powered offense. They're fast. They're athletic. And they lost some guys at graduation. They lost a couple guys in the transfer portal. But they've also done a great job of recruiting the transfer portal. They've got a couple D1 dropbacks. And one of the things that Coach Cooley has always done really, really well is he does a good job in the JUCO portal down there in Mississippi, and always finds a way to reload. So, they lost a couple guys at graduation and transfer portal. I expect them to reload. And I think they're going to be a tough out in the Gulf South. And I think I'd look for them to maybe hope, we'll see, but repeat there in the Gulf South this year.
All right. Number 8, Minnesota State. Mavericks were 10-3 last year. They were they finished first in the Northern Sun.
Yeah, you know what? Everyone, when they look at Mankato right now, the question really is Mankato back? And I would say much more yes than no. I'm not really ready to fully say yes. The reason for that is they lose quite a bit on the defensive side of the football, to where they lose their top tackler. Then and Peyton Conrad, then Elijah McGee, the probably top defensive playmakers, gone to the XFL. They've just got some other challenges, and they're going to be young that way. But they are, bringing back 2 guys on defense from our Elite 100, Jacob Dalton and then Trey Vival. So, at the same time, they have some real stars returning too, and Vival is the kind of guy you just don't want to kick to in the special teams game either. But defensively, they also lose Jim Glogowski, who is Coach Glow was their, kind of Coach Hoffner's right-hand man since 2016. And they've been down a lot of roads together and a lot of success. Defensive line coach Todd Taylor will take over. And he'll call the defense now. He was a defensive line coach under Glow a year ago. And offensively, I think that they're going to be pretty strong. You have Hayden Eckern returning at quarterback, who is a dual threat guy. Bigger fella as well. They bring back 1,000-yard rusher Shen Butler Lawson, 1,000 yards, 12 scores. They do lose the top 3 ball catchers they had from a year ago. And they were pretty active in the portal, looking at some D1 transfers. And I think they picked up a nice combination of speed and size there. So it'll be interesting to see how that turns out. But I would imagine that they're going to play behind their offensive line, pound the football, be more of a running team early, maybe a little opportunistic in the passing game, whereas they threw a little bit more last year. And I'm just expecting you're going to see a little more traditional style from the Mavs this time around.
Wait, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the defensive side of the football for Mankato, because if you go back to maybe about the 2010s, around that timeline when this team really started becoming an elite program, defense was really their identity. They had one of the fiercest and most physical, just nastiest defenses for quite a long time. And that hasn't really been the case for the last couple of years. So what do you see their identity looking like? I mean, you talked about some of the player talent that they lost, but also you mentioned that Jim Glogowski has left the program to go be the head coach at Sioux Falls. How do you see that really impacting what their identity is and what they're going to look like defensively this year?
I really feel that that's the number one thing that they really need to address, Chuck, to try and be the Mankato team that everyone thinks of and the identity that you alluded to. In the back half of last year, we all recall how they kind of got it going. And it was like, oh, here they come. And I mean, they had Mines 21-7, and they let them off the hook. And if they win that football game, our playoffs are a whole lot different. We don't know exactly how it turns out. And so I think that they were really trending in the right direction as the year continued. The fact that Coach Taylor was under the learning tree of Glow, I think, is going to make a lot of this not huge changes for them. But at the same time, when you're calling a defense, and Glow had a lot of experience with that, certainly, there's a comfort and a trust with that. And Mankato's going to they start off, Chuck, with Sioux Falls and Wayne right out of the gate, so they're going to get tested in that regard too.
All right. Moving on to number 7, West Florida. The Argos were 12-2 last year, and they were a semifinalist in the playoffs.
Yeah, guys, there's a lot of questions right now, I think, with West Florida, and a lot of things left to prove for them going into this year. Obviously, new coach Caleb Nobles, a new offensive coordinator, and a new defensive coordinator. And so I think there's, a lot of change in leadership in that program right now. I think they lost some guys. The transfer portal had some guys hop in, hop out, but they were also able to get some guys in the transfer portal. So again, a little bit of an unknown. Just some quick notes on that. They lost David Durden and Simpler and Hargrove to graduation last year. They lost Zach Elam, starting center, went to Coastal Carolina in the portal, and then Walker, one of their defensive linemen, ended up going to Kennesaw State. So a couple of losses that they had. When you look at returners on the offensive side of the ball, obviously you got Pee Wee Jarrett back, you got Caden Leggett back, to name a few. And then on defense, you got Will Breland and Willie Jordan, two of the tackle leaders on defense. But then you've added John Giles coming from Virginia Union. You've got KJ Franklin from Nichols, and Byron Purrier from College of DuPage, and Jacob Dorn from Saginaw Valley. So they've been able to get in that portal a little bit to replace some of their needs. And so there's a lot, I think you have to see it play out this year on the field to really get a feel for what West Florida is going to look like. A couple other miscellaneous notes, though, guys. Nobles, obviously, he's a first-year head coach. He played quarterback at Valdosta State and West Florida, and later was a quarterback's coach and OC at West Florida, and spent the last 2 years at Clemson as a quality control coach. Offense is probably going to look a lot like what we saw with Coach Shinnick. Defensively, however, Cavell Connor comes from Clemson. He's going to go to that 4-man front. They've been a 3-man front for a long time. They're going to go transition to that 4-man front. So a little bit of change we'll see on the defensive side of the ball. They had a lot of success with that at Clemson, and I think you're going to see a little bit of that defense that they were able to have some success with at Clemson down there in West Florida. The schedule is going to favor the Argos early. They have a home game against Kentucky Wesleyan. They have a game against McKendree, and then a road game at Florida A&M before they start the Gulf South Conference slate. So, they've got 7 guys returning on offense, 5 on defense, and a lot of question marks mixed in there. So I think we have to see how it plays out, guys, for West Florida. I expect them to be dangerous on the offense. How quickly can they pick it up on the defensive side of the ball? Because we know they're going to face some high-powered offenses there in the Gulf. So I think there's a lot of potential. I wouldn't be surprised if we see them second, third round in the playoffs again this year. I just think there's a little bit that has to be played out, and we'll see come week 3, week 4 where West Florida stacks up.
Justin, I just want to note the FCS game here, because we know West Florida has done some things against FCS teams in the past, especially like with McNeese the last time.
Yeah.
How big, or potentially how big, is a game against FAMU, another team that's virtually in the same, relatively the same area as Pensacola and West Florida?
Yeah, I think where it becomes really important for West Florida is in that recruiting battle in that area. I think with a new staff, with Coach Shinnick there, you kind of knew what to expect. With a new staff and with new leadership in the program, I think it's really important they go out there and they have a good showing. I think it's not far-fetched to think that they're recruiting some of those same guys and vice versa. So I think it's really important that they have a good showing. I also think it's good, for the guys in the program. And that's something we don't talk about very often. But when you have new coaches and new leadership, new coordinators, you start to you may question it if things get tough, right? But if you can go out there and you can compete and you can battle and you're competitive right off the gate and don't really miss a step, guys are going to buy in, and that's when it really can start rolling and they can get dangerous. So good question, Ferg. I think I think it's a big game for them. Not just because it's an FCS game, but because, like you said, those recruiting battles and that geographic location.
I don't know if something that happened 2 years ago really matters anymore or not, but they scrimmaged FAMU, I think, before the 2021 season. And had that been a real game, the belief was that West Florida was probably the better football team. So I think they can match up with FAMU. I mean, FAMU's a good team, but I think that West Florida can match up with them. I think that they've already seen that that the talent level they have in the program can compete against an FCS. So I think it'll be a really interesting game.
All right. Moving on to number 6, Angelo State. They were 12-1 last year. They were first in the Lone Star Conference.
Welcome to the segment of push-pull. Okay, push is where we're going to talk about what has happened with somebody leaving, and pull is what actually stayed in the program. So Angelo State last year, 248 yards passing a game, 181 yards rushing. On the passing front, they've got to replace Zach Brockhorst, who graduated, been in the program for quite some time. And the backup, who may be the starter this year, really didn't have a lot of reps. So a big question at quarterback. At running back, let's talk a little bit about that. They have somebody coming back right there on the screen, Kason Phillips, who had over 1,000 yards in offense between rushing and receiving. But they also lost Nate Omayebu as a transfer to Southeast Oklahoma. It'll be interesting to also see if they can create sort of a 1-2 punch with Alfred Greer still on the roster, but has had to deal with some injuries. And if so, then I think that really helps with probably easing in a new starter at the quarterback position. It certainly doesn't hurt to have their leading wide receiver coming back, and Rasheem Green as well. So let's talk a little bit about defense, because I think there's a little bit more losses here. Certainly returning Abiye Williams, who was second on the team, tackles for losses, but they had some losses on the defensive line. Trey Colbert, who transferred to Maryland, and also linebackers who either transferred to FCS schools or they graduated. So certainly some questions there. The one thing I will mention is I like to look at special teams a little bit, just because I think it also can help break in new offenses and release some of the pressures off of them. So Cade Fuller, a punter, averaged 42 yards a punt, which is certainly top half of the division, Division II. So I think that really helps as well. So area probably where they need to improve is third down. 38% on third down is not spectacular. So that's just a little bit about Angelo. Certainly some challenges that they're going to have if they want to repeat this year.
Ferg, when I took a look at Angelo this year, when I was trying to do my top 25, I found them to be a very challenging squad. That's kind of where I wanted to land them. I don't know if there's another team in the Lone Star who's really available and ready to challenge them for that 2 spot. in terms of two battling one. I think there's a whole bunch of teams that are going to be like a 3 in there, but I was real concerned with some of they don't just have losses; they have like all conference, all American type losses also.
Right.
And when I looked at that, they bring back a whole lot of the secondary, but you're going to be breaking in a new quarterback and things like that. Do you think there's a chance that maybe this is the year where somebody kind of sneaks up and gets them? And if that's somebody is it maybe a place you've been at school at before?
Well, it's certainly they do look a little vulnerable. I think they also look vulnerable because of the schedule. They got to play West Alabama. They also got to play Mines for the 4th time in 3 seasons. They might as well just start a rivalry cup at this point. But if you look at kind of what's happened in Lone Star, Central Washington's always a bit of a threat. West Texas has a new coach now that's a proven winner, and so it'll be really interesting to see what they've done with that squad. Permian Basin certainly threatening as well, with some injection of new talent too. So, and then you can't count out Midwestern State. You always think that they're down and they just find a way to kind of surprise you a little bit. So they look vulnerable, but I think that Angelo is still going to be a really tough out because of the fact that they have quite a bit of talent at running back in particular to sort of keep teams sort of off balance. One thing I will note about Angelo, 33 minutes in time of possession. And I think if they have that running game to sort of help keep other teams off the field, it may help them quite a bit. So,
all right, very good. Number 5, Northwest Missouri. They were 10-3 last year and finished 2nd in the MIAA.
Yeah, the Bearcats kind of got into the playoff bracket when we really weren't sure if they were going to make it and extend their long run of making the playoffs in consecutive seasons. But once they got in, boy, they sure proved to be a dangerous team. Now, they did lose some heavy hitters on the defensive line and at the linebacker positions. But if there's one thing I do not worry about in Division II football, it's Northwest Missouri State having a really strong defensive front. I think they'll be fine there. Yeah, they've got some bodies that they have to fill, but I don't think that's going to be a problem area for them. I think they'll be just fine. The big question is, what can they be offensively? They played 2 quarterbacks a lot over the last 2 seasons, and that was part by necessity. They had some injury problems, so they really had to go with 2 different guys. Neither one really played consistently well enough to make them, not give the other guys some reps. But this year, Mike Hollins, he's going to be the guy. So he's going to be the undisputed leader. They're going to need a lot out of him. And I think their season really could depend on just how well he's able to play, how well he's able to lead them. He may not have that, that star standout running back that they had the last couple of years. So we'll see how they develop their depth at the running back positions. What I do like is that they're very good at the offensive line. They've got 4 starters back. It should be very strong. They should have good size there. So, Northwest Missouri is a team that can always reload no matter what they lose, no matter what they bring back. They're always going to reload. They're always going to be good on defense. But, it's been a while since we've really seen them push through and be the best program. They've been a top 5. They haven't been the best program for a few years now. So, do they have what it takes to actually get back to a national champion caliber roster? We know they're going to be good, potentially semifinals type of program or a round of 8. But it is an extremely difficult bracket to get through in that region. So do they have the team that can beat Grand Valley, can beat Ferris State, can beat Pittsburgh? I don't know the answer to that question yet. I think there's enough question marks about what their offensive identity will be that I don't know that they can be that team. That said, that still puts you in top 5 territory because they're going to be playing with some of the best teams in the country just within that region.
Absolutely. Number 4, Colorado School of Mines. They were 13-3 last year and were the national runners-up.
When I did my top 25 poll, I actually had Mines a little bit lower than this, more closer to the bottom half of the top 10. And I think I might have undersold them a little bit. Obviously, the biggest thing is that they've got John Matoka coming back, our 2022 Harlan Hill winner, one of the most elite players, one of the best leaders, one of the best performers in the country. Just having that back is a massive asset. They also have about 4 offensive linemen back. Now, they did lose their center, who was kind of the quarterback of that line. Won the award that's given to the best center in the country last 2 years. So that is a big loss. But to have 4 other starters back is huge. And they've got Max McLeod back on the offensive side of the ball as well. So I do think losing Mike Zeman is a bigger challenge than it might seem. When you have a guy like Matoka, you assume he's kind of the leader of that team, the leader of that offense. I think Mike Zeman's leadership and his toughness and just the things that he was able to do to kind of put that team on his back, I think that's a big thing to try to compensate for and to overcome. So I think losing him is a very big deal. I know that they were able to bring in a transfer from FCS that they're very, very excited about. So we'll see what he can do. But losing Zeman's a big deal. But they're still going to have a very good looking roster. The coaching change doesn't worry me at all. I think Pete Sturbick is very well suited to take over the program. Probably could have taken this job 2 years ago when Greg Brandon retired. So I'm not worried about the coaching change there at all. I think that they're in fine shape. So I think we're gonna look for how well do they adjust on defense to some losses, and do they have the players on the roster to make up for losing Mike Zeman? But it's definitely a very good looking team.
All right. Checking in at number 3, the Pittsburgh State Gorillas. They were 12-1 last year, and they were the champions of the MIAA.
Brandon, when I look at the Gorillas, I think of how they had Ferris State on the ropes in the second round of the playoffs, where they had a chance late there to steal that game and couldn't quite get it to happen. But it illustrates, I think, how close they were last season to being one of the top teams in all of D2. Pair that with the fact that they were an undefeated MIAA, champion. They did experience a little bit of turbulence, though, in the spring. The top running back, Caleb Lewis, 1,000-yard rusher, 12 scores. He ends up going to Tarleton State. And then Christian Carter, 700-yard receiver, ends up going to Memphis, FBS squad. So, I mean, that's huge. It's 2 significant departures there. And when you take a look at the fact that they do return still what I see as the top tight end in Division II football, Devin Garrison, the 6'6" athletic target, who moves a lot more like a wideout when you watch him. I think he's the kind of guy who's still going to give him a huge threat offensively, along with Chad Dotson's a very capable quarterback. Wasn't necessarily a prolific passer a year ago, but a very efficient one. Threw for over 220 yards a game, 29 scores, 9 picks. And they return a lot of the offensive line that they had some of their better players there. Along with on defense, they return 6 MIAA, all-conference players from a season ago. That was a very good defense. And they're also dangerous in the return game. So I think they still have enough firepower. I think they're still very hungry from where they got a year ago for us to have them ahead of Northwest and in the top 3 here.
All right. Number 2, Grand Valley Lakers. They were 12-1 last year, and they were the champions of the GLIAC.
Yeah, Brandon. And so, it's tough to get to somebody who's ranked number 2 and think that there's, some question marks with what they come into the season with. But it's hard not to ignore the fact that there was a change at the helm in terms of the coaching staff. Matt Mitchell led the program for 13 seasons, and Scott Wooster is going to be in his first season at the helm. But like Chuck was talking about with Mines, I don't know that there's an enormous amount to be concerned with here. Just when you look at what the Lakers come back with in terms of personnel. Cade Peterson, first team All GLIAC quarterback, and is going to come back for his senior season. Avery Moore saw a lot of time at quarterback last year, and he's back as well. They get leading rusher Tariq Reed back, who was over 1,000 yards last year. Now, they did lose their top 2 pass catchers to FBS schools via the portal, so they're going to have a little bit of work to do replacing that production, and losing their best offensive lineman in Quentin Barrows, not an easy thing to replace as well. But I know the staff feels really good about who they've got coming back. Yeah, and I think helping with the stability wise for Wooster in his first season is, he was able to hang on to both his OC and his DC. So the way the Lakers have run things on both sides of the ball doesn't appear to have any imminent changes coming. And so when you look at all the talent that's back on offense, and then maybe even more importantly on defense, when you got guys like Christian McCarroll and Abe Swanson coming back, you see 41 making a tackle there on that video there. It's hard not to feel good about what the Lakers are going to be able to do from a defense that was one of the tops in the country last year, giving up only 11 points a game. So top end of the country, top end of the GLIAC. I mean, certainly it's a spot that they earned based on what they did on the field last year, and I think they're feeling pretty good about their chances to be right back in the mix again when we get to November and December this year.
Tony, I hate to put you on the spot, but if you were to pick one thing that the Lakers have to do well or improve on in order to have the kind of season that they expect, what would that be?
That's an interesting question, Brandon. And I think one of the things that I think we'll see, and I think there's going to be an emphasis on it, and I think it goes to where Scott Wooster's experience comes from, is it's going to be the offensive line play. So, prior to coming to Grand Valley, he was the offensive line coach at Wayne State, and he was coaching the offensive line at Grand Valley on Mitchell's staff before getting promoted to the head position. So it'll be real interesting to see, how he balances, running the program in its entirety and still trying to get the type of growth and production out of that offensive front. So again, they were very good last year. Can they take a step forward and continue to be really difficult to deal with? Both in terms of how they dictate tempo throughout games, but also how they close games out as games get into late into the fourth quarter.
All right. And number one, Ferris State Bulldogs. They were 14-1 last year. They were national champions for the second year in a row.
Yeah, the more things change, the more they stay the same, right, Brandon?
Yeah.
So, obviously Ferris has earned that mantle that they've been on here now for the last couple of years of coming into the season as our odds-on favorite to win the title. They've done it on the field the last two seasons. They bring back a whole host of talent on both sides of the ball. Most notably in the quarterback room, you get Malik Mitchell back, you get Carson Gulker back, who led the team in rushing, and so with that 1-2 punch at the quarterback position and guys who can do lots of different things and make it difficult for defenses to plan for them. That's one of the things that I think Tony Anise likes to be able to do, is keep people guessing and not really know what it is that they're going to do when they have the ball. So when they run the ball with Gulker, they like to be more of a quarterback first. They little bit of question mark as to who's going to do a lot of the work at the running back position, but they've actually kind of done a lot of different types of things with getting wide receivers the ball. They should show a couple plays to Brady Rose getting the ball out of the backfield. They did a lot of that with Marcus Taylor last year. I'm sure they're going to miss him, but having guys like CJ Jefferson back and picking up a good wide receiver through the talent or through the transfer portal, they're going to have plenty of speed and plenty of power on the offensive side of the ball. I think on defense, it's tough to replace a guy like Caleb Murphy, who's, in camp with the Titans now and has a real good shot to make a name for himself in the NFL. They lose their best linebacker through the transfer portal to an FBS school. They did have a couple of guys graduate on the back end of the defense, but gosh, then you still look at who they got coming back, Larry Oladipo's back up front.
Right.
They picked up a first-team All-GLIAC transfer and Victor Nelson from Saginaw Valley. So, nobody's feeling sorry for Ferris in that regard with what they're going to bring back. They're still going to be really tough and really nasty up front. And, we've talked about it on the show here, guys. I mean, that's one of the hallmarks of playing winning football nationally in Division II, but certainly within Super Region 3. Boy, you got to be really good up front on both sides. And I'm not seeing anything that's going to indicate that there are any chinks in that armor for Ferris State heading into this year.
Tony, when I was looking at Ferris State, I was trying to look into them, and obviously, having a little trouble with her. We don't even have their roster up yet for this year. Yeah. But as I was going ahead and kind of taking a look at things, and I was able to follow the breadcrumbs enough, watch them on media day and so forth. I started to get the feeling like maybe they're even stronger this year than they were a year ago. They lose Murphy, who, he obviously is like almost like the Aaron Donald of our level, right? Just ridiculous production
for sure.
But then they bring in, a star transfer from, Saginaw Valley. And so I start to look at all this, and I'm looking at some of the other portal pickups, and I'm thinking to myself, is there a chance that maybe they end up being even a better squad this year?
It's absolutely a possibility. And I mean, the other thing you got to look at too is one of their best players, and Xavier Wade hasn't really played much in the last year or two because he's been dinged up. So
right.
If he's back and is healthy this year, that's, if there's one thing that, we talk about this every year, but it bears repeating. Everybody sees all the points and all the yardage and the explosive plays and thinks that, Ferris throws the ball a lot. They don't. They are a run first outfit, but that's part of where they get you, is that they get you so concerned about what they're doing in terms of having to defend a quarterback who can run the ball, lots of motion, lots of veer concepts, lots of difficulty in pinpointing where the ball is going to go. And then every time you think you've got their run game somewhat figured out, they've got somebody who's lightning fast running in space who gets hit with a pass, and then it's a big play that your back end got burned with. So, picking up that wide receiver transfer from Indianapolis doesn't hurt him any. But again, I think getting Xavier Wade back, who's an emotional leader on that team, is going to be something that can't be overlooked for sure.
All right. Well, there you have it, everybody. The Ferris State Bulldogs were picked to repeat as national champs. I don't think that comes as a surprise to anybody. Ferris State will open the 2023 season hosting Mercyhurst on August 31st. Just a reminder to like this video, subscribe to this channel. Those kind of things help us out. Follow us on social media. We're at D2Football in all the major social media, so Facebook, Twitter. We have an Instagram account that's D2Football as well that we'll be posting to that as well. A reminder, during the week, columnists break down the teams and races in their conference. We'll provide coverage and perspective that a lot of fans, quite frankly, won't get from their local media or their sports information director. We'll get an honest evaluation of what's going on in Division II and with your team. On game days, access our scoreboard. Take advantage of it. You can sort scores by top 25 conference or by super region. That's very valuable, especially as we get closer to the playoffs. And we also have the biggest collection of the best fans in D2 on our message board. So sign up for that. It's not automated. I do it manually to keep spam off of there. And so it might take a day to get registered, but you can send me an email or a DM if you need me to draw attention to that. Want to thank the NCAA and Grand Valley, Pitt State, ESPN, and Northwest Missouri for the use of their video in today's show. And we're going to thank our supporters and be right back. Just wanted to take this opportunity to thank those who have supported D2 Football this year. D2 Football is free, but it isn't cheap. Your support helps offset our expenses and allows us to expand our coverage. If you like what we're doing, please consider supporting us. Visit d2football.com/support. Or if you want to do it the old-fashioned way, click contact on the website to find our mailing address. But again, thank you for supporting D2 Football. All right. Well, we had some questions that came up during the course of the show, as they always do, questions and comments. Let's go ahead and hit some of those. I'm going to show this one first, and it's kind of the same thing. Calvin said Ashland may be ranked a little too high, and Joe kind of said, I wonder about Ashland, and I guess reputation goes some. I agree with both those guys, as I'm sure you guys do, that that's a reputation pick. I can't think of a worse situation for a new coach than to lose the players that he lost and then have the opening schedule that he has.
Oh, yeah.
So, all right, let's look at this too.
Chuck, you're muted, by the way.
Chuck was dropping wisdom that he.
I know. Yeah, I just had all kinds of stuff. Yeah, no, I just I forgot to have myself muted. Hey, it's preseason, right? It's week 0. No, I didn't rank Ashland. And that's no disrespect to the program, but just with what they have to replace and the start to the season they have. I also did kind of look at that and thought, if they could beat IUP and represent well against Ferris, then that's a real good reason for me to put them in the top 25. Really,
No doubt.
But, yeah.
All right. Let's look at this one. Slippery Rock should be a lot higher. A lot of returning starters. I don't think they should be a lot higher. Maybe a few spots. This is one thing that has always not annoyed me, but it's kind of like a pet peeve, is when somebody says you left so-and-so off of your Elite 100 team, or so-and-so should be higher. Nobody ever says who they should replace. So theoretically, they're just complaining that why aren't these 25 teams ranked in the top 5? And it's a lot harder when you have to do the whole thing. I don't vote in the poll myself, but as Whit, you vote in the poll. It's hard just to think that Slippery Rock should be 7 and just find a way to put it there. You got to work backwards. It doesn't work out that way. Tell us about your thought process when you're putting together your poll.
Yeah, there's sometimes where I may say, I may get done with my poll, Brandon, and somebody will ask me, okay, who do you have at this spot? And I'll say, okay, I have them as 7th. And they'll say, well, I don't know if they're a top 10 team. And I'll say, well, you didn't put together all the pieces of the puzzle either.
Right.
Once you have to start going 1, 2, 3, sometimes who you have at 7 is the best team left, and you may not feel that they're a top 10-ish team, but sometimes that's just the way the poll's looking right at that moment. And so there's so many little things that go into that. I think with the fact that, for example, in this case, Slippery Rock, the fact that they have a new quarterback that they're going to have to break in, I think that's a thing that a lot of teams, like our voters, I should say, don't have a lot of confidence in a squad when they have to do that. Now, if they have somebody that is coming in, like, for example, Karst Hunter probably, gives them a little bit of a boost, because I think we could probably make a case that he's an upgrade for them. That's not taking anything away from Mr. Sexton. That's just saying we think Karst Hunter can help them not only in the passing game, but also help supplement the running game, because he's a hoss. So, so I think there's some thinking like that. At least that's the way I go about it.
No, I kind of thought that too. And I wondered that about IUP, because I thought that was a big pickup. But at the same time, we also have to come to the realization that we're probably a lot farther down the rabbit hole than most people are, even people who vote in our poll, to understand that those things are happening in that dynamic. Let's pick up another one. Same thing. Interesting that West Florida is ahead of Delta, and kind of the same kind of thought process. Didn't West Florida beat Delta in the playoffs last year? What has changed that makes it a surprise that they're ranked higher in the preseason? I don't vote in the poll, but I have to say, if I were voting, I would have probably put Delta ahead of West Florida, even though West Florida won last year, because of the question marks surrounding the program, losing players, losing coaches, and quite frankly, a coach that may be a Hall of Fame college football Hall of Fame coach one day, but it is his first season as a young head coach. I think there are a lot of questions, and I think that West Florida probably is too high, and certainly I would have had Delta ahead of West Florida. Does anybody disagree with that?
No, that's exactly right, Brandon. I actually had those two right next to each other in my poll from when I first started, swagging out what it might look like until I was done. I had those two like right next to each other. And I think I actually flip-flopped them multiple times when I was going through iterations of my top 25. And when I finalized it, I did have Delta State ahead of West Florida because of Patrick Shigog. Mm-hmm. When you've got an asset like that and you trust at the most important position on the field, that means a lot. The stability in the coaching staff, and just a little bit of not quite knowing what the identity of West Florida is going to be this year. I don't think people completely understand and appreciate how much of a miracle worker Pete Shinnick is. So you don't just replace a man like that. Now, he left a really good roster behind. There's infrastructure there, but that's a big variable for me.
Okay.
I would agree with all of that, Chuck. And I think just to kind of go back to some of the things that Whit was talking about, and I think just to talk about the poll in general, and Brandon and you and I've had this conversation. low so many times over the years.
We're old, Tony.
That's right. Well, but that's a great segue into where I'm going with this. We grew up with polls. Think about cracking open the newspaper, because that's when you saw the poll was on Monday mornings or Tuesday mornings when the AP and UPI polls would come out. This predates the coaches' polls. And, you'd see teams that would be ranked in the top 10. And and it'd be predominantly because they had, let's say it's week 8, right? They're 8-0. But I look at a team like, maybe Duke put a good year together and they're ranked 7 and Michigan is ranked 8. And I'm looking at that going, man, Big Ten ball is way more difficult than ACC ball. Why are they even ranked remotely close to each other? Because if they put those two teams on the field right now, I know who I think's going to win.
Right.
And that's kind of how I try to always, when I vote, I always try to think to myself, okay, if I got a question about where somebody should be and they're around somebody else in the poll, I always think to myself, all right, if those two teams get on the field, who do I think is going to win? Or more importantly, what kind of a line do I think Vegas is going to put on it? And that to me is one of the tiebreakers that I use. And yet I'm still fighting the battle of that's what we grew up on, right? Where those polls where the fact that somebody's 10-0, I know damn well they can't beat a couple of the teams in the poll that are 8-2, but people are going to still vote them up much higher because they don't have the 2 losses. And so that's part of what makes the polls interesting and conversation starters and whatever else. And it's not an exact science. So, the fact that people are asking us questions about that is part of what the point of them is. So it's a good thing.
All right. Calvin wants to know why no Newberry. I think that's an interesting question. I think part of it's based upon reality and part of it is based upon perception. Let me touch on the perception first. They missed the playoffs last year because they had to disqualify one game, caused them to miss the playoffs. All right. So now they're not in the playoffs and they're kind of out of voters' minds. I think that's the perception part. The reality is they lost some really good players, and I don't know if they deserve to be in there even had the perception not be an issue for Newberry. They were marginal, right on the edge anyway, and then they lose Mario Anderson.
They lost their whole offense.
Yep.
Okay.
They lost the quarterback. They lost Mario Anderson to South Carolina. They lost their 2 best receivers, and I think an O-lineman or 2. So, I mean, they lost most of their offense. So they're going to have a very different look. And the last time they had some big turnover like that, they had 3 straight losing seasons. So, I think there's just a lot to prove there.
Very good. All right. Bradley wants to know, why can other levels play week 0 but D2 can't? I know that Minnesota State and Northwest talked about a week 0 game, which would have gotten nationwide attention. Chuck, you want to address this one?
Well, first of all, I think it's a great question, and there is a lot of movement. In fact, we heard a couple of conference commissioners talk about this topic in their Media Day comments, which, by the way, thank you to conferences like the Gulf South, the RMAC, the GLIAC, and the Lone Star for actually having their commissioners give some comments at the open of their Media Day. Let
me interrupt out of fairness. Chuck. The MIAA commissioner did as well.
Well, yes, we've heard.
The reason I want to say that's because he's involved with what you're going to talk about, I think.
Yes, and we've heard from Mike before on this topic. But there's a lot of support and a lot of movement for playing the 11-game schedule in a 12-week period, which currently we don't do that. You can play a maximum of 11 games, but they have to fit within an 11-week period. So there's a lot of movement to extend that to 12 weeks. There's even some talk about pushing the championship game out a couple weeks, maybe even after Christmas, after the New Year. So there's movement to change that. As far as why they wouldn't, Whit, do you want to tackle the why, or do we just want to say the NCAA likes to be?
Well, I mean, I think there's a few
no
pieces
fun,
of that.
no fun.
The idea that you would have to have the kids on campus, and there may be some extra money on that piece. I think that's probably a big factor. Frankly, I think the NCAA just kind of likes the way it's compact and neat, the way it is right now. And I just don't think that they're wanting to have kind of entertain that additional week, because we really haven't heard anything good for feedback as to why, you didn't see something like a Mankato and Northwest play, or I'm not real sure it offers somebody that big of an advantage if they start earlier. I mean, as long as you put everybody on the same page where you make that open, I don't think it should be a problem. I think it gives you a chance to, here's a good idea, grow your level and make it something feeling a little bit more important, have a bigger game out there. It's almost like they were afraid to do that in this case, and that's kind of what I didn't like about it.
I just want to throw in that in addition to those conferences, the SIAC and the CIAA also wanted a week zero game that would have featured the past champions of those two leagues to face off in week zero, Benedict, Fayetteville State. So, I mean, to not have that week zero was kind of a blow for us as well.
Yep.
Yeah,
that would have been very interesting. So, all right, let's look at more poll stuff. No assumption. Whit, you want to handle this one?
Yeah, I was. I saw that in the comments, and I thought, okay, was there some sense of entitlement that they should be? They were what, 23rd, I think, in our final poll, which means that they're in there. But I mean, let's be real frank. Anything after 20 could be anywhere up to 30. I mean, it's very fluid at that point. I looked into assumption, to be real honest. I just didn't have them beating anybody that I had ahead. So, I mean, when I take a look at a Pueblo I had at 25, line that up today, I'll take Pueblo. That's kind of what we're looking at there is, do I have them beaten 24 Davenport? I don't. So that's kind of the way and Tony, you alluded to this before. If the team's at 26 through 30, which I think Assumption, New Haven, I think I'd have both of them right in that mix, to be perfectly honest. But I just don't have them beating 24 and 25 that I have at the end of the line.
Yeah, totally agree with that. And to that same token, I mean, I look at a Saginaw Valley State who, maybe lost a few guys, but they've got Jairus Grissom back at quarterback, who's a heck of a playmaker. They went 8-3 last year. I take them over Assumption right now too, and they're not in the poll either. So I think once you get past 20, I think you kind of got it right where all bets are kind of off at that point.
Sure.
All right, we will take 4 more questions. Whit, let's come back to you. Do you think the NSIC is undervalued in this year's poll? What NSIC teams could be ranked by the end of the season? I guess that Matt's wondering that we're not ranked at the beginning.
Yeah, when I saw the beginning of this question, I said, and it says NCIS, I thought we were talking about a television show there for a moment. But see what I get easily distracted.
Mark Harmon.
I get easily distracted. It was food earlier, but so as we look at this, Wayne State is the one I think of right off the top. They were a squad that was had beaten Mankato last year, then lost to him in the playoffs. And Brandon, as you mentioned, I think what happens in the playoffs can be very defining for if teams land in the top 25 or not. And the fact that they didn't show great there, I think is probably leading into some of that. I'll talk more about the Northern Sun in a few days on my own deal, but I really think there's a whole bunch of teams in the Northern Sun that are probably in that 25 to 40, 50 mix with teams like Duluth and teams like a Winona State, maybe even Augustana. And I think they're going to beat up on each other again this year. And I think that's a risk the Northern Sun has, is the more you beat up on each other, the less you're going to see yourself ranked too.
Okay. For you poll voters, I'm going to adjust this question a little bit. How much does the preseason poll influence polls once the season has started? Let me ask that in a different way, because I don't believe it does once the season started. How much do the conference preseason polls affect your poll voting?
Whit, do you want to start with that, or do you want me to go first? Or Tony,
they don't impact me just about any, to be honest.
I
already have a draft up.
Yeah, I don't. I don't put any credence in the preseason coaches polls, with some exceptions. You'll sometimes see coaches put some confidence behind a program that maybe didn't have a great season the year before. Benedict a year ago comes to mind. I think they were a preseason number 2 and they were 5-5 the year before. So that told me something that I didn't previously know, that the coaches liked that program. But those occurrences are pretty rare. I don't look at those very much.
I would agree. Every coach I've ever talked to says that the preseason conference polls are essentially a rehash of what actually happened the year before. So unless there's some sort of massive shift where, everybody in the program left and they're going to drop off by 3 or 4 games, they pretty much are going to land where they did in the actual standings from the season before. So, it's really, for me as a voter, I'm more looking at, all right, where did we vote them last year? What do I know about changes that they underwent? And that's where I start going into the season. Yeah, the conference media or coaches polls, I most of the time I'll look at them, but they don't impact where I vote.
Okay.
Hey, Brandon, when I look at, when I saw like the AFCA poll come out and I saw like Millersville was getting votes and, Wayne State of Michigan and, Winston-Salem, those that didn't influence me to pick them as well.
Was that a shot at you, Ferg?
You didn't throw some votes at Morehouse, Whit?
Let's just say there was some eye-popping names in the bottom there of teams that had losing campaigns coming into this year that made me wonder a little bit.
Calvin, I'm going to answer this one. This year, the MEC teams are just going to do without a game. I know a couple have tried to schedule. I don't know if they've had success yet, but that's simply a bad situation, and they're going to be without an opponent. I know one team was able to get hosts for homecoming, so they didn't lose their homecoming game. And I can't remember who was AB supposed to play the first week. Do you remember that, Chuck?
Yeah, California.
Yeah.
Okay, and they were trying to get a game, but otherwise they're just going to have to do without. All right, our last question for the night, because it's a more fun question. What team deserves to be ranked that isn't?
I mean, I could think of a couple to probably just throw out there as a starter.
Just throw them out there.
So you've got, Truman. You've got Fan State, Fort Valley State are a couple that come to mind that, in addition to Assumption, that could be, possible fringe top 25.
I agree. I had Notre Dame in. They did lose Chris Brim, who was their quarterback for like 9 years or something like that. So that's a big loss. But they do have some other big talent coming back, and I think the schedule sets up really nicely for them. It won't surprise me if they're a 5-0, 6-0 team by midseason, and we have them in the poll. Truman State, Ferg, you mentioned them. I actually had them in at 25. I think that they've got a lot coming back. I think that they can challenge UIndy in the GLVC. So do they deserve to be ranked? Am I mad that they're not? No, but those are two teams that I put some confidence in.
Did you have an opinion on this, Whit, or are we good to go?
I don't want to be too much of a homer. Wayne State is the first one that comes to mind in that group. Chuck just took a whole bunch off my hit list.
Yeah. So it makes sense. All right. Yeah. Very good. All right. So next week, again, we don't have any games this week, but next Thursday, not this Thursday, but next Thursday, we'll open up the 2023 season. We're still going to have a show next week. What we're going to do in this show, every one of us will give our picks for the conference champion in every conference. We'll see how those turn out. We'll preview the week 1 games, and we will also debate, whether you all want to or not, which conference is the best and why. We will talk about that. So I know Tony cannot wait for that conversation.
No interest.
Yeah, I know. All right. Nonetheless, that is going to do it for tonight. We appreciate you all being here, and we will see you next week.